Welcome to More Details, Please, with your hosts, Emmanuel and Angela Williams, where we dive deeper into conversations with visionary entrepreneurs to discover what it takes to turn passion into purpose. Listen to real-world stories from self-starters and trailblazers, and discover strategies and innovations shaping a greener future. Whether you are a seasoned business person or just starting out, let this be your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable tips for success. Join us now as we create a brighter, greener future together.
Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of More Details, Please, where we get more details about business, entrepreneurship, and life. I'm Angela Williams.
And Emmanuel Williams.
And we're so happy to have you with us today. So today we're continuing our theme, It's About Time, and making the best of the time that we have. But today we're going to get into setbacks, failures, and those things that really we don't like to talk about, but we have to.
Yeah, well, if there was no failure, there could not be a success. And if there was no success, there could not be a failure. And so we come here to talk through processes as entrepreneurs that made us successful. And so our goal is to share nuggets of wisdom to entrepreneurs and people who is thinking about becoming entrepreneurs so that they could have a good shot at becoming successful. Because that's what this podcast is all about. It's about turning our passion into purpose. And our passion is to share our experiences with other people to help them. And that is serving a greater good that is bigger than ourselves.
An exciting part about it is a setback could be a setup for a comeback. So let's get ready to talk about how to come back if by chance you have a failure or a setback that you are unhappy with. And we have a special guest today. So we're going to talk about that special guest.
Well, that special guest is a special guest. This is a guy who I was joined by the hip for 20 years. It is one of the guys who had the most greatest influence in my life and has helped me to become the man that I am today. And it is my older brother, Dr. Williams. And I am really excited to see and to talk with him about his journey and some of the setback and failures and upsets and how he has been able to overcome them.
Wonderful. So we'll get him in just a little bit later. But you know what? It would be so much easier just to talk about winning. But we would not have a full show if we did not address setbacks and failures and how to get beyond them. So today we're going to not only talk about setbacks and failures, but what we did and what we would recommend that you can do as well if it would happen to you. So first, I'm going to have Emmanuel just to kind of share one of his experiences and how he was able to overcome it.
Well, I'm going to go with growing up as a kid. And this story has Dr. Williams as a part of it. We was trying to get into this instrumental group and we had to audition. And so he made the group and I failed. I wasn't able to get into the group. And I went home crying to mama. And she said, "What's wrong with you, boy?" I said, "Well, Theron was able to get in the group and I wasn't able to get into the group." And so what I did was I went and got some pots and pans from under the sink and I started learning how to play the bongos. And for that Christmas, Mama brought us bongos and drums and guitars. And we ended up having one of the most popular group in the neighborhood that we lived in. And then I asked Dr. Williams, I said, hey, when y'all went to audition and when y'all did a show, I wasn't there, but how did it go? And then he really had to rub it in. What he said was, he said, man, all of the girls was chasing us like we was the Jackson 5. So I was really angry and mad that I didn't make the group, but that was just fire to fuel me to overcome that failure setback. And I become a musician as a result of those failures.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We've had setbacks and detail experts as well. It hasn't always been rosy. I can remember a time when we had negotiated a deal for months. It took months to actually close a deal, but there was this feeling early on in the process. It just didn't feel right. I knew that it wasn't a good deal and we probably should not go through with it. But we did, and it did not end well. And I remember thinking to myself, I knew we should not have said yes. We should not have signed on a dotted line. We should have just waited or pulled out. And I, after it all happened, I cried and I prayed and I cried and I prayed. And then I got up, I dusted myself off, and I said, all right, back to the basics. And the basics for me were I had to be at peace with what occurred. That was the first thing. I just had to be at peace. Now this had happened. And then I had to find the best feeling thought that I could find. And then I had to begin to turn in the direction of what I wanted. Those were the three steps that I took to get back on track after a setback that we didn't expect, that was really painful, but we were able to come through on the other side.
Well, that's the reason why I like this podcast is because we have the ability and an opportunity to share these experiences to help other people. And today I was thinking about the podcast and I wanted to go into my nuggets of wisdom toolkit and pull out a tool that we have used to allow us to be able to overcome setback, failures, and upsets. And as I was looking at my toolkit, I decided that it would be good to use this particular tool to share with our listening audience. And that tool that I was able to use is called meditation. And meditation, some people call it prayer, we call it meditation. And meditation has been a very, very powerful tool that we have been able to use. And I'm going to give you guys some tips and some information that will, if you use this tool properly, it will literally change your life immediately. Meditation. So just let me give you a little bit of information before we talk about meditation. Did you know that a human being, each one of us, have between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts that runs through our mind per day? Now think about that. 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts that run through our mind each day. And each thought triggers, feeds an emotion that makes us feel a certain kind of way. And that emotion feeds the thought, and the thought feeds the emotions. So just understanding that is really, really important. The second thing is, did you know that 95% of our thoughts are repetitive? It's the same thoughts over and over and over again, which triggers the same emotions over and over again. And 90% of those thoughts are rooted in the pain from the past and the fear of the future. 90% of the thoughts we think is a story we tell ourselves of the pain of something that happened, the pain of the past, and the fear of the future. Now, when you guys have all of this going on and you don't even really realize that that is going on inside of your space, then you are at the mercy of your mind. And I call that the matrix. So let's get into meditation. So meditation means your ability to be able to focus, okay? Or we say meditation and or prayer is the ability to become more familiar with. We say meditation is our ability to become more familiar with. And so the reason why I'm breaking this down and I'm explaining it to you in this particular way, because I want you to see it from my perspective, because this is a practical tool that we have in our toolkit that we actually use to help us when we're dealing with setbacks, upsets, and failures. So we take the road that meditation is to become more familiar with. And the first thing that your mind does, because it's always wanted to be attached to something, to say, become familiar with what? Let me become familiar with something. That's what your mind does. It always want to attach itself to something. And we say, become more familiar with, and this is really powerful and this is life-changing, the stories we tell ourselves and the emotions that is triggering as a result of the stories we tell ourselves. And so what we're really doing is, it's sort of like your mind is constantly racing. And the more stress you're under, the faster it races and the more thoughts that come into flourishing. And when you become more familiar with the stories you're telling yourself and the way that it's making you feel emotionally, that's like a car traveling 100 miles an hour and you slam on the brakes. That right there just stops your mind right there in motion. Now, it doesn't stop it completely, but it slows it down. And what that is really doing is bringing the light of awareness into your dark space. Now that you realize that you are having these thoughts, and you are aware of the stories that you're telling yourself, the next thing that really happens is that you become more clear about the stories that you're telling yourself. And as you become more clear about the stories you're telling yourself, because this is a practice, this is something that you have to practice, meditation. Some people is really good at it and some people have to work at it. But when you become more clear about the stories you're telling yourself, the next thing that happens is you have a realization that you have a choice. So choice come into action because you can see clearer now. So you say, well, now I see these stories. Now I have a choice to entertain this story or that story. And that is sort of like a remote control. When you're looking at TV, you got the remote in your hand and you're constantly changing the channels until you find a channel that makes you feel good. And when you find a channel that makes you feel good, then you can entertain that. It's fine. It's great. You're having a good time. But this is a part of our meditation. And then what happens is that the more you become more familiar with the stories, the brighter the light gets, the clearer you can see. And then I always ask this question: what happens to the dark when you turn on the light? So tonight, when you go turn the light on, just ask yourself, where is the dark? I'm going to tell you where the dark is. The dark is a part of the light, right? So what happens is that in your meditation, becoming more familiar with the stories you're telling yourself and how it makes you feel, those scary, dark, angry stories that you've been telling yourself, you see it so clear now that it becomes not relevant to you anymore. When you realize those stories that you're telling yourself has no use other than to make you suffer, I call it, you kind of like reincarnate and you become a different person. And this is the key. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So in our meditation, this is a tool that we use all the time. And when our back is up against the wall, or when things are not going the way that we want them to go, or when we are in a state of fighting each other and arguing or whatever, we always go back to using that tool of meditation. So I just wanted our listening audience to understand in our nuggets of wisdom, if you use this tool, it is literally life changing. And to use it in a practical way when you need to use it, whenever you want to use it, is the key to overcoming setbacks, upsets, and failures. Angela, this is a question that I wanted to ask you. When you went to college, the first day you walked into college and the day you walked across the graduation stage, you went in one person and you came out the other person. What are some of the tools in your toolkit as you dealt with upset, setbacks, and challenges as a student was more common that you used mostly?
Um, I'm sure I had several upsets, failures, etc. during college, but I was totally different. I was 17 years old when I entered college, and I was 21 years old when I graduated from college. So I was older. I had more experiences. I was mature. I had a major change in my life. My mother had passed away during that period. So my support system had changed. So from that, I grew up. I was more mature than I was before. But for me, I really utilized the power of prayer, and I also spent a lot of quiet time. So we can call that meditation, reading books like A Course in Miracles, etc., just to kind of get through the hurt and the pain that I was dealing with. And I focused quite a bit. What was most important to me is focus. I knew I came there for a purpose. I have 4 years to do it. And that's what I did. I focused on it every single day. I started with the end in mind, and I knew what I needed to do every single quarter or semester or year so that I can be done in those 4 years. And then outside of that, I had some fun, because even though setbacks happen, you have to figure out how to pivot. Things happen in your life, and you make a decision that now I have to pivot and think about something else or focus on something else. And that's exactly what I did. But before we bring our special guest in, I think what's most important is failures allow you the opportunity to expand. And it also gives you an opportunity to pivot as well. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Um, I don't like to use the word failure. I use the word unsuccessful in my attempt, because failure cannot exist without success, and success cannot exist without failure. And in between that is a measuring tool. Is a measuring tool to figure out, okay, what is the thing that I need to do to get to where I have to go? And so I was unsuccessful in this attempt. And so therefore, I needed to get this lump to figure out what do I need to do, because the purpose of us here on this planet is to evolve and live on purpose and be a part of God consciousness. That's the whole purpose. And in aligning ourselves with that, all of the things, the things of life, the joy, the peace, the abundance, all of that comes with that. And so when we say entrepreneurs are turning their passion into purpose and are living in alignment with that to serve a greater good that's bigger than themselves, the process itself is a part of them growing and evolving, because that's why we was put here on this planet, to serve each other.
All right, great. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Yes.
Now, we don't want to delay. Our special guest is here, and we are excited to introduce our special guest. He is my brother and my pastor when I lived in Indianapolis, and he is a sought after author. I was reading his bio, and something that I didn't know that in 2023 he was named best author. And I was like, I'm so excited. I can remember reading his books prior to that. And I'm like, it is so exciting to hear about all of his books. So I would like to introduce to our audience today my brother and senior pastor of Mount Carmel Baptist Church in Indianapolis, Indiana, sought after speaker and author. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Theron Williams. Yay!
Well, can I would like to add this because we go way back, and this guy is like the superstar to me. And I'm just going to share a time in our entrepreneur career where I think that was where my entrepreneurship desire came. Um, he was into movies, and my mom brought us a movie projector and a movie camera for Christmas. And he wanted to be this director, big time Spike Lee type director. And we was into karate. So we used to go to Hudson's and buy these 15-minute karate movies. So we're looking at karate movies, and I don't know who said it, but one of us, he said, well, I got an idea where we can make some money. I'm like, so what's going on? He said, we could take a sheet. Now, we little rascals, we could take a sheet and hang it up in the basement, and we can have our friends come and charge them to look at these karate movies. And I'm like, man, that's a great idea. Let's run it by mama. So we ran it by our mother, and she said, okay, well, what I could do is pop some popcorn and make some Kool-Aid, and we can have all of our friends come to the house and look at karate movies. We can have like a matinee. And I'm going to tell you, we had a long line of kids outside of our home coming in watching karate movies. And so I think intuitively, we understood that God was preparing us for life journeys because we knew that entrepreneurship was going to be a big part of our lives. And I am just so honored to have him here on our podcast to share his nuggets of wisdom because he has a whole bunch of nuggets of wisdom. So thank you for coming.
We're so happy to have you.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate you guys, and I love you, and I love what you're doing. And I've watched, your evolution from being an engineer, working with the school system, and then coming up on this epiphany about the different uses of water and steam and creating different gadgets that can change water into steam and use it for cleaning purposes. And now that has evolved into a business. And I've seen Angie's evolution joining the Mount Carmel Church way back in the day. She an old school member, and then the two of you hooking up, and and Angie worked for us for a spell at Mount Carmel Church because we were dealing with some issues at our church with our finances, and we brought Angie in, and Angie came on for a few months and said, this is bigger than what I can do on a part-time basis. You guys need to find someone full-time to manage this. And I saw that whole evolutionary piece going on with Angie. So it's good to see how I've seen y'all's journey and how it merged into one, and now it's became detailed experts and doing great things. So yeah, that's a great journey, great story.
All right.
And to add, well, to correct the story about the karate movies in the basement, mom didn't buy that. I bought the projector and the camera, working for working for working my co-op job at Murray Wright High School, and I saw those cameras that I always wanted and the projectors, put them in the layaway back in the day, and paid on them and got them out. So that was something that mom didn't buy. I did that. So yeah,
Wow.
that in perspective.
And so early on, so he already knew. So can you tell us a time where you had to experience a challenge in your life and you had to come through? And again, you can share from any perspective of your life.
Well, I can tell you that one of the turning points in my life is when I was 19, and I had to decide what I was going to do because I had already started in the ministry when I was 19. In the ministry, was I? Yeah, 19 when I started preaching. And that same year, our mother was killed tragically in an accident, and I had joined the Prince of Peace Church where the late Reverend James Flakes was the pastor, and he became like a father to me. He was an educated preacher, graduated from Ball State University and Earlham School of Religion, so he had a Master of Divinity degree, and he instilled in me, if you're going to be a preacher, you need to go study. A call to preach is a call to preparation. But I was still boxing. I was caught in between the two. What should I do? Should I continue to box? Because my fantasy was to be this great world champion and get my mother out the projects. You know, that was one of the main reasons I was doing it. But when she was killed unexpectedly at 46 in a car accident, then I'm 19 years old. Boxing doesn't have the same attraction that it used to have. So now where are you? So I had to make the transition. It was at that point that I decided to go away to college, and my whole life changed as a result of that, um, and set me on the path, on the trajectory that I am on now. Even to this day, I'm still on that same trajectory that was set back when I was 19 years old. So that was a situation that sort of changed and propelled me into a new reality, a new space, a new direction in my life. So yeah, that was pivotal.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
That is powerful, and it's so interesting that we share a similar story there. But setbacks aren't permanent, so things happen, and then you made a decision, you did something else. So let's talk a little bit about that. When a setback occurs and you make that decision to do something else, what drives you at that point?
Well, first of all, we have to define or redefine what success is and what failure is. You know, a lot of people define success as the acquisition of money and fame and property and fortune and all of that. And if that's your definition of success, that's fine. So the opposite would be, if I don't make the money, if I don't get the house, if I don't get the fame and the accolades, then I'm a failure because it's based upon your definition of success. So if you look at success by that matrix, and if you define it by those terms, then some of the greatest people that ever walked the planet would be considered failures if we attach to them our definition of success, which is the acquisition of things, money, power, fame, and all of that. If that be the case, Jesus was the biggest failure who ever lived. He was born in the hood in Nazareth. He was not rich. He was poor. He said, foxes have holes, birds have nests. I don't even have a place to live. I don't even have my own address. So he was born in Bethlehem, but he grew up in Nazareth. And when he began his public ministry, he moved to Capernaum. And it is speculated that when he was living in Capernaum, he was living at Simon Peter's house. And then we talk about the success. I mean, he couldn't keep a crowd. People listened to him and didn't like his message and left. He would draw a lot of people when he was feeding them bread and fish. But when the bread and fish were gone, they were gone too. So he couldn't keep a crowd. He was always in conflict with the leaders of Israel and with the leaders of the Roman government. Got down to the last days of his life, all of his friends left him, and he got killed, crucified, died of crucifixion, capital punishment. He was put to death because he was a rebel. And the only time that Rome would crucify people is when they rebelled against the Roman Empire. So Jesus died as a rebel. So if you want to measure success by the acquisition of things and popularity, Jesus would have been a failure according to that definition. And so would have the Apostle Paul, a major failure. You know, he was killed at the end of his ministry and forgotten about. And Paul didn't become famous until 200 years after his death, when we found his letters and put them in a Bible. Then Paul became famous. But prior to that, he would have been considered a failure. So we have to redefine what success and failure looks like. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if you want to measure success by the acquisition of things, then he was a failure. So was Malcolm X. So was Marcus Garvey. All of them would have been considered failures. So we have to redefine what success and failure, what they are, So, and your question was?
So the key really is how they responded during those processes, right?
Say that again, Andrew.
The key would have been how they responded. So in spite of, and their redefinition of success. So in spite of all of that, we still see those figures as successful in their day.
Right, because we use a different metric to define success. That Jesus was successful in that he challenged systems of domination and he left that legacy for us. That defines his success. That he challenged domination and violence, and he died as a result of domination and violence. He died a violent death at the hands of a domination system, but God raised him from the dead, which suggests that he defeated the powers that put him to death because God raised him from the dead. So he's successful in that regards, and only those who believe that in faith that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, there are people who don't believe he rose from the dead, and so you have to receive that aspect of the life of Christ by faith, which I do. I believe he overcame domination. I believe he overcame violence by taking the violence and domination in his own body, crucifying them on being crucified at Calvary, and then God raised him from the dead. He overcame that, which means that this system of violence and domination can be overcome. Christ proved it on Calvary. And so in that regards, he was more successful than anybody. So the challenge is not to define your success based upon the tangible things you can have, but how is your life impacting society? How is your life impacting your brothers and sisters in your community?
Well, Dr. Wick, this is what I love about your ministry.
I love that.
I've seen your evolution, and I've seen how you have been able to stay relevant with the young people in this time. Because when you talk about success and the culture that we're living in, the culture dictates to us, especially in our community, who is successful and what success is. And I see that as a way of keeping people stuck in a place where they can be controlled. And as your ministry and all of the things that you're doing in your ministry, you run a entrepreneurship out of your church, you're an author, you have your own entrepreneurship going. But the thing that really impresses me is how you have been able to tweak your message and stay relevant with young people. What inspired you to do that?
Well, you talk about failure, and there are some people who see themselves as striving when they're really failing. And it's not until you get to the other side and look back and talk about how much of a failure you were. So I would consider myself, when we talking about this whole thing of success and failure and the redefinition of those terms, I saw myself, as I look back over my 37-year ministry, for most of that time, I was a failure. You know, I was successful in the eyes of my congregation and community, but the message I was preaching was a message that was rooted in white evangelical theology. And white evangelical theology, for me, is the theological arm of the domination system. And the purpose of white evangelical theology is to justify domination, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And here I am in the pulpit preaching white evangelical theology, thinking I'm killing it. And to my congregation and to my community and to churches around the country, I was. I mean, this is this super guy, this super preacher. You know, people are shouting and responding and all of that. But all the while, man, I'm preaching death to my people if I'm preaching theology that's rooted in a white biblical interpretation. It is this white biblical interpretation that justifies slavery, that justified the subordination of women, that justified white supremacy. I mean, if you go back and read the philosophers and theologians during the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, particularly during the European expansion, you read their theology, man, it's some of the greatest thinkers that we have to study in philosophy when we go to college. And you got Donald Trump now trying to stop DEI and trying to stop black studies in colleges and universities, but want to keep white studies. And if you look at the origin of those white theologians and white philosophers, rooted, woven into their philosophical and theological thought is the supremacy of whiteness and the degradation of blackness. You know, so all of that impact theology even to this day, even to how we understand Jesus, how we understand the Bible. All of that is from the prism of white evangelical theology, which the bottom line, the goal, is the supremacy of whiteness and the glorification of white Jesus. And I was preaching from that perspective, and I look back on it and I say to myself, you were a failure when you were preaching from that perspective. Now I have a different perspective. Starting with 15 years ago, it started to change and evolve. And we talked through this a whole lot, Emmanuel. You and I talked a whole lot about that evolution from I no longer want to be a preacher that preached to my people white theology, the same theological justification that stopped black people from going into white churches. Now I'm in a black church and I want to preach that same ideology. To me, it's just insane. It just doesn't make sense. And so the shift began to a truer and far more biblically relevant message that's rooted in the Bible. Let me say this. The Bible story was written under 6 periods of Hebrew oppression and domination: Egyptian domination, Canaanite domination, Assyrian domination, Babylonian oppression and domination, Persian domination, and Roman domination. It was written by dominated people, Hebrews, to talk about dominated people who were Hebrews, to talk about a God named Yahweh who was on the side of dominated people. So now if you got a document that was written by people who were suffering under oppression, who was writing to people suffering under oppression, how in the world can that book be somehow transmuted into a book that support the dominating class against the dominated class? So it takes a theology to shift it so that those who are on top, the oppressors, can have God on their side. So they pervert the Bible and the scripture to use it to justify their being on top. How in the world can a book written by people who are oppressed, for people who are oppressed, talking about a God who's on the side of the oppressed, now all of a sudden you take that book and you switch it and place God on the side of Donald Trump and Elon Musk? It just doesn't make sense. It's not logical.
So let me ask you this.
Wait, hold on.
Oh,
So that's why you decided to write the Bible is Black History,
Yes,
and you also forayed into a children's version of the
yes,
Bible as well.
yes.
So let's talk a little bit about, before Emmanuel gets to his question, because I know he is dying to ask his question, why you decided to write these books. And as the president of the Bible's Black History Institute, tell us a little bit about the goals for that. Can I get that in first?
sure.
Okay. Well, several years ago, I saw, this is when I'm in my transition, trying to get out of white evangelical theology, making sense of what it is, and then transitioning to a theology that's more germane to my experience and more honest to the biblical witness. And I saw our young people, millennials, who were defecting from the church. They were leaving. And I'm like, and I thought it was a Mount Carmel thing, and I'm like, where are my young people? They would leave and go to college in time past. When they came back from college, they went to college out of town, they came back to the city and came back to their church. Or if they didn't come back to their church, they went to some church in the city. But I was experiencing people, young people who were going away and just wasn't coming back. And even if they did return to Indianapolis and didn't return to Mount Carmel, they were not going to church at all. So I thought it was a Mount Carmel thing until I started talking to pastors around the country. They were like, no, my millennials don't come, so they started defecting from the church. So I called a meeting with all of my millennials, the ones who were still at the church and the ones who had defected. And many of them who had defected still appreciated me as a pastor. And so they came to the meeting. We had food and all of that. And I said, I'm not going to judge you. I just want to talk to you to try to figure out what's going on with you guys. And how come you're not in church and you know better? Many of you I baptized and dedicated when y'all were kids. You've grown up, you've gotten scholarships from the church, you finished college, you're back home. And those of you who didn't go to college, you went into the workforce and you're doing well. So what's going on? How come you guys are not at church? And I had about 100 people to show up. That's people who had defected and people who were a part of Mount Carmel Church, young adults. And we're all in this big room talking, including my children, Taylor and Theo. We were all in this big fellowship hall and we're having a conversation. And I'm going around the room asking, what's going on? How come you're defecting? And as many young people that were in that room, that's how many different reasons there were. But there was one common theme that was persistent, and that is they felt like they had been excluded from the biblical story. They didn't see themselves represented in the story. They didn't like the fact that they had to come to church and study about white people, and where am I in the biblical story? And why is Jesus white when we know that he was born in northern and northeast Africa that we call Israel today, which is connected to the continent of Africa? Why is he always depicted that way? And they had all of these questions and challenges that the church hadn't responded to. We hadn't responded to those challenges because we didn't see them as a challenge. They started questioning the authority of the Bible. They said the Bible was a book written by white people to oppress to oppress black people in slavery. They said Jesus was a reinvention of Horus. They had all of these different things going on that they had gotten off the internet, a lot of misinformation, and then they shared that information with their friends on social media. And social media has algorithms where if you're thinking the same kind of way and clicking likes on the same thing, they put you all in the virtual community. So you had this virtual community of millions of young people across the world thinking and believing the same thing. So I said to them, I tell you what, give me a month. I'm going to do a Bible study with you guys, and I'm going to address everything that you just laid out in this meeting. Give me a month. and I would do a Bible study with you. And then after that, if you still feel the same way, then I understand. But at least give me a shot. They said, okay. That 1 month Bible study turned into a 9 month Bible study because I was learning as I was developing my Bible study lessons. At the end of it, it was greatly appreciated. The majority of them said, we still fixed on what we believe. We won't be back to the church. We got a problem with the church. I said, cool, but you heard it. But they appreciated it. And they said to me, many of them said, you know what? This stuff is too valuable, Pastor, for you not to share with other people. You need to put this in book form. I had already done all the research, so I put it in book form. And went through Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, and published it and all of that. And once you go to Kindle Direct Publishing, it automatically posts on the Amazon website because Kindle is a subsidiary of Amazon. So once I published the book through Amazon KDP, self-published, it posted on the Amazon website. And I was done. I ordered books off of them as an author, and I passed them out to the people in my church and for a few people who heard about the study. And I was done with it. And then a young lady called me up and said, Pastor, have you been following your book and what it's doing? I said, how do I do that? She said, you got to go on Amazon, click on your book and scroll down and you will see what it's doing. When I did that, it was a #1 new release. It has sold thousands and thousands of copies. We set up a website immediately after that, and I got so many invitations to speak about that book around the world. You know, most of my international stuff was done online via Zoom. Um, Invitations, people were calling me for podcasts, and I'm trying to figure out, what's going on. And it wasn't my best academic work because I didn't intend it. I just intended to give it to my church people so that they can have it. Then when it started blowing up, I said, okay, I got to go back and I got to rewrite it. I got to make it more academic and all of that. And then it just exploded, and from that point on, people have been calling on me I'm supposed to be the authority in it now. You write a book, they tell you you're supposed to be the authority in the subject matter that you wrote the book on. So that's how it got started. And I saw it evolve. And as I went around the country to do lectures, people were asking, well, what about kids? What about young adults? Which made me go back and write children's books, young adults books, workbooks, and that type of thing. And so now we have the Bible's Black History uh, Institute, and we are about to launch our online academy. Um, because everywhere I go, no matter how long I stay, people want me to stay longer, and of course I can't do that. So because of that, we have launched our online academy. It's a 9 month program. We are working in cooperation with Virginia Union University, where if you finish it, you get continuing education college credits, and you will be certified as an instructor so that you can go out and teach concepts of the Bible as Black history. So that's about to launch. We're getting ready to start our promotions this month, as a matter of fact. So we're getting the website and all of that stuff together. So we're doing pretty good. We're on pace to do it, to do what needs to be done. So that's how we end up where we are today.
Thank you for that. Imai, you want to go? You want to do your question?
Well, I
Or
do.
okay.
I do. I know you have a kid's book that's a movie with it and videos. Um, and what kind of plans do you have with that piece as well? Is it part of the Bible is Black History Institute, or is this a separate business entity?
No, it's the same thing. We got 2 tracks. We have the Bible is Black History Online Academy. That's what it's called. One track is certification, where you get um, certified as a Bible's Black History instructor, and you get continuing education college credits for it. It's challenging, it's rigorous. You're going to work to get it because we have to have a certain standard if you're going to get college credits. We just can't throw things out and you just do a little stuff and get a. No, there is a standard that we have to meet, and we have met that standard. There's another track that is not as rigorous as that one. You get the same information, but it's not as rigorous. You don't have to do all of the reading. You don't have all of the tests and quizzes and writing the papers and all of that. It's built more toward a Sunday school, vacation Bible school, church Christian education curriculum that you can breeze through. And in that track, we have videos that I showed you. I sent to you to get your critique of them and that type of thing. So, along with the study, with along with the study and the books and all that, we have the videos because we want to get people involved. We want to get young people involved. We have a children's edition, where we look at Adam and Eve. We look at uh, the creation account, uh, Abraham, Father Abraham, and all of that. And we depict them in the way they were more likely depicted in their own day and time. They're not white, they are people of color. And so and we have an alphabet book. Did I send you the video?
Yeah, we did.
We have an alphabet book along with the video so the kids can watch the alphabet book and along with all of that and the animations and that type of thing. So we are really excited about what we're doing, and we hope that, and not only is there a track for those who want college credits, and for the churches, there's also another track for um, uh, black schools, black Christian-based elementary schools and high schools, and there are like 531 of them around the country. So we're trying, and there's one of them that we already have. I sent you the video of what that school is doing. We're in conversation with that school right now to take our entire curriculum so that they can build it into their Christian education curriculum at their school. And so we're reaching out to schools around the country, Bible-based black private schools.
Well, when I looked at the information that you sent, um, talking about it is an understatement. The images, the information is just phenomenal.
I
And if
wish
I
I
was a
had it
pa-
when I was a kid.
and if
Yeah.
I was a parent, is it a possibility that I can just personally buy this, or do I have to become a part of it? What ways that I can have access to this?
That's a good question. If you're a parent, you can rent the video. You can buy the books, but the videos are available for rent, not for sale. So it's a question of log it on to our platform,
Mhm.
and you can rent it, and it's yours in 9-week intervals. So if you have a kid at home and you want to teach this kid about Bible study and that type of thing, of course it's available to individuals, but they have to buy it. You buy the books, and then you rent the video for 9 months. And then once you're on our platform, you see the video, you enjoy it, and then after 9 weeks, it goes away.
All right. I know we're running over time because we are literally out of time. And I know our producer is going to get us in just a minute. So let me just ask you a couple questions. And please excuse me, producer, if we run over for a few minutes, and I'm respecting your time too. But if you can give us practical steps that you will take if you are experiencing a setback or failure, what are some practical steps?
Um, First of all, you have to establish what your goals are going to be. And then once you establish your goal, then you can define what your setbacks are. If my goal is to reach people and get this information to people, if I'm doing that, whether I make $0 or $1 million, I have accomplished my goal because I want to get that out. If I experience a setback in that I'm being hindered from getting this message out, then at some point you just have to rely on God and trust that what you're doing is in line with the will of God. And that God, if you trust God, God will provide a way for this information to get out. You know, so through this entire process, and we've been, Jackie and I have been doing this along with um, uh, Kathy Jordan, another person who's working with us. We've been doing this, putting this program together for 2.5 years, and we've run into so many barriers to try to prevent us. But for every barrier we've run into, there is an alternative plan that we believe that God had for us in the first place. You know what I mean? So we will get there, and when I run into a barrier, I try to understand it as a way of God opening another avenue for me to get to where we believe God wants us to be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Because I think that is important because our listeners need practical steps. What do I do when it happens? Because most people think it's the end. It's over, it's finished. But how do you get beyond that? So let's look at this last question that I have for you, and then I'll ask, how do people get in touch with you? People fear failure. So how do you get beyond that fear of failure that paralyzes you and stop you from acting at all?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, if we use Peter as a model for overcoming failure, you know, he would be a good model. Because one of the things about Peter, Peter didn't understand Jesus. And I don't know if he had understood Jesus from the beginning, he would have followed him. I don't know that he would have. Because Jesus came talking about a kingdom. And when Peter heard kingdom talk from a person as charismatic as Jesus, he automatically assumed that it would be a violent overthrow of the Roman government and that Jerusalem and Israel would be under the authority of Jesus. And if Jesus is the king of Israel, then Peter is his best friend. That's going to put him in power as well. So they're going to go up together. They're going to overthrow Rome. They're going to push the dirty Romans out of Israel. And Jesus is going to reign as king over Israel. And Peter was all down for it. We know he was down for it because when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane by the soldiers, Peter was the first one to take out his sword and attack the man and cut his ear off. And I want you to know he wasn't aiming at the ear. That man ducked and Peter caught his ear. That, you know, Peter was going for blood because he already told Jesus, hey, look, I'll die for you. You know, because he said, I would die for you, believing that Jesus would launch a violent revolution. He didn't understand the man. Jesus, I'm not about violence. This is not about a revolution in the way that you understand revolution. So when they arrested Jesus, prior to his arrest, Peter was boasting about, I'm going to be there with you. I got your back. You know, I die with you. Jesus said, before the cock crows, Peter, tonight, you're going to deny me 3 times. It's just going to happen. And Peter said, no, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. It happened. And the last time he betrayed Jesus, he was following Jesus from a distance. The cock crew, Jesus turned and looked at Peter, and then Peter remembered exactly what Jesus said. And he had a breakdown. He was done. He was finished. It was over. Jesus had another disciple named Judas. Judas sold him out that same night for 30 pieces of silver. Now, both of them fell. Peter went home and wept bitterly about it. He acknowledged his failure, he understood his failure, and he was remorseful about his failure. Judas failed as well. Judas wept about his failure, but he went a step further and killed himself. Both of them failed. One of them committed suicide, and one of them wept. You know, one of them took action against himself, took himself out, and the other one just took out a handkerchief and cried it out. On Resurrection Sunday, when Jesus rose from the dead and the women went and they saw that he had arisen, the angel said to the women who went looking for Jesus, go tell my disciples and Peter that Jesus is going before you into Galilee. You know, I know Peter flunked, I know he failed, but go tell my disciples, and don't forget Peter, even though he failed, and I believe the angel would have said, and Judas. But it was too late for Judas because Judas killed himself. When you flunk, understand that failure doesn't have to be final. Because after Peter fell and he wept, he reconnected with Jesus. And this same Peter, who was such a coward, was the same Peter on the day of Pentecost 50 days later, who preached one sermon and 3,000 people were added. Peter became the head of the Jesus movement, and Peter died by crucifixion the same way his Lord died. The point is, when you fail, understand that failure is not final. That failure doesn't have the final say. That if you can hang on in there, you can rebound from your failure. Don't get a gun, don't get a razor, don't get a rope, get a handkerchief and cry it out. You know, it's a long way between a rope and a handkerchief. Judas got a rope and hanged himself. Peter got a handkerchief and cried it out. They both failed, you know. So that's how I deal with failure. Cry it out. Pout, kick,
I
scream.
feel like we're about to open the doors of the church. So hold on a second. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so happy that you could be here. We can keep you on so much longer, but instead, how can our listeners get in touch with you? What is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Right behind me, you see that the board behind me. BibleIsBlackHistory.com. Bible, not the Bible, just BibleIsBlackHistory.com.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so
Thank
happy
you so
that you
much.
came. This was so much fun. Thank you
Yes.
all for joining this episode of More Details, Please, with our special guest, Dr. Theron D. Williams. And we're so happy to have him here with us today. And we're so grateful that he came and blessed our show. So thank you so much, everyone. Bye for
Thank
now.
you. Appreciate it. All righty. Have a great day. Oh, you want us to stay on and still talk? That's what she said.
Did it stop behind the scene?
Man, this is thank you for the conversation.
The mobile. Thank you for listening to More Details, Please, presented by Emmanuel and Angela Williams from DetailXperts, the mobile steam cleaning company dedicated to protecting the planet. Be sure to subscribe to More Details, Please, on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Facebook at DetailXperts and visit DetailXperts.net. That's DetailXperts.net. We hope you've gained some valuable insights from our conversations today. Stay driven by curiosity, and we'll bring you more details next time.